Hello and good morning. I am your host on the podcast, The Hero's Journey, and today we are reading chapter 2 of The Dream Giver by Bruce Wilkinson. Just to recap really quick on chapter 1, it was the beginning of this story with Ordinary, who lived in the land of familiar. He found a big dream in his heart, and after going through much decision making, he decided to pursue it. He left the land of familiar, and now he is walking toward his big dream for the very first time. I actually forgot to read the last page in that chapter, so I'm going to begin right there and then jump into chapter 2. Ordinary leaves his comfort zone. So this is last page of chapter 1. The night before he left familiar, Ordinary decided to use the long white feather to help him remember the truth. He pulled out a notebook and wrote "My Dream Journal" on the cover. Then he dipped the quill in permanent ink and wrote on the first page. The dream giver gave me a big dream before I was even born. I just finally woke up to it. My dream is what I do best and what I love to do the most. How could I have missed it for so long? I had to sacrifice and make big choices to pursue my dream, but it will all be worth it. It makes me sad to think that so many nobodies are missing something so big. Chapter 2, Ordinary leaves his comfort zone. The next morning, Ordinary woke up to the usual time, but instead of reporting to his usual job, he packed his suitcase with the usual stuff. Then he added his journal and a bottle of permanent ink. Just before he closed the latch, he carefully placed his long white feather inside. Soon, Ordinary was walking away from comfortable, the center of familiar, where almost every nobody lived. He was headed toward the border, where almost no nobodies ever went. Ordinary had never dared to walk this way before, but like every nobody, he knew that the further he walked from the center of familiar, the less familiar things became. He also knew that most nobodies who tried to leave their comfort zone in familiar became so uncomfortable they turned around and went home. Some were so glad to be back, they sat in their recliner for days, waiting for nothing to happen with a sigh of relief. But Ordinary told himself he was different from most nobodies. He would pursue his dream no matter what. Brimming with anticipation, Ordinary whistled a new tune while he walked, and he dreamed about the great things that he would accomplish. Life had never seemed so promising. Ordinary hadn't gone far, however, when he no longer felt like whistling. He couldn't say why, but he just wasn't in the mood anymore. Then, as he walked further, he began to feel edgy. The scenery looked different. The leaves on the trees even looked leafy in a different way. Now, when Ordinary thought about his dream, it looked different too. For the first time, he saw how pursuing it could cause him a lot of discomfort. He would have to do unfamiliar things in unfamiliar places. He wouldn't even have his box to watch. And then he had an even more disturbing thought. To do what he loved the most, he would have to do what he most dreaded. Ordinary's mood quickly went from edgy to anxious. His steps began to slow, and he began to have big doubts about his big dream. What was he thinking? He didn't even have enough talent or skill to succeed at his dream. He was clearly unable to accomplish great things. What if he failed right in front of the other nobodies? Worse, even if he could do his dream, he was clearly unworthy. Any nobody could see he didn't deserve to live his dream. He was just ordinary, after all. Maybe the dream giver had meant to give his dream to some other nobody, more noble than him. By now, each step was harder to take than the last. His anxiety grew into fear, and then up ahead he read a sign, leaving the comfort zone of familiar, entering borderland. Now Ordinary felt sheer terror. Sweat poured off of his forehead. He could hardly breathe. He could hardly think. Then, just as he came to the sign, Ordinary hit an invisible wall of fear. He stopped, unable to take one more step. He dropped his suitcase and sat on it. Should he turn around, he wondered, or should he try to find a way and go on? Time passed, and then he heard these words. "Why are you stopping?" Ordinary recognized the dream giver. "I think I want to go back home," he said weakly. "I'm not the right nobody for this, to go after such a big dream." "Yes, you are," the dream giver said. "I made you to do this." "But I don't think I can," he said. "Yes, you can. And I will be with you. I will help you." Ordinary stayed where he was. He watched an unfamiliar bug crawl across the toe of his shoe. Strange birds flew by overhead. After a while, he stood and looked longingly toward the unknown. Somewhere out there was his big dream. But getting from here to there seemed way too hard. Then he looked longingly toward familiar. He fondly remembered all of his comforts, his usual job, his best friend, his recliner, his box. There was something wonderful about nothing happening. Ordinary picked up his suitcase and decided to take just one step in that direction to see what it felt like. It felt better. Right away, his breathing became easier. So he took another step, just to see what that step would feel like. It felt even better. He went on with each step toward the middle of familiar. Ordinary grew more comfortable, but he quickly noticed he was also growing sad again. And he knew why. With each step he took, he was leaving his big dream further behind. Then he heard the dream giver again. "Why are you going back?" he asked. Ordinary stopped. "Because I'm afraid. Leaving familiar feels too scary and too risky," he said. "Yes, it does." "But if I was supposed to do this dream," he exclaimed, "then I'm sure I wouldn't feel so afraid." "Yes, you would," said the dream giver. "Every nobody does." Ordinary hung his head. He thought for a moment. "But you could take away the fear. Please, take away the fear," he begged. "If you don't, I can't go on." "Yes, you can," the dream giver said. "Take courage, Ordinary." And then he was gone. Ordinary saw his choices clearly now. He could either keep his comfort or his dream. But how do you take courage when you don't have any? Ordinary decided his fear wasn't going to leave. He would have to go forward in spite of it. Still trembling, he picked up his suitcase, turned his back on familiar, and walked to the sign. And even though the fear kept growing, Ordinary shut his eyes and took a big step forward, right through the invisible wall of fear. And there he made a surprising discovery. On the other side of that single step, the exact one Ordinary didn't think he could take, he found that he had broken through his comfort zone. Now the wall of fear was behind him. He was free, and his dream was ahead. He began to whistle again as he walked on, and his big dream beat brightly in his chest. Later that day, Ordinary took out his journal and his long white feather and wrote down the truth about his comfort zone. It was hard to leave my comfort zone, but it would have been even harder to leave behind my dream, and I'm glad I didn't. I still don't feel worthy or able to do my dream, but the dream giver has promised to help me. Now I know I can take courage even when I feel afraid. My big dream was on the other side of that invisible wall of fear. I had to step through it. I didn't think I could, but I did. End of chapter 1. Sorry, that's end of chapter 2. Next time we will read Ordinary Meets Bullies in the Borderland.